So this is, of course, a pro-abortion terrorist group in the United States. I believe it was around the 2nd of May that Justice Alito's draft majority opinion of the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organisation leaked to the public, and in this draft it suggested that the Supreme Court would overturn Roe v. Wade, which it eventually did. And since then there have been innumerable terrorist attacks all across the United States, and many of these have been attributed to a group known as Jane's Revenge. And where does this name come from? That's a bit of a strange name, isn't it? And it's taken from Jane Collective, an underground group in Chicago, Illinois, which operated between 1969 and 73, offering women abortions when it was currently illegal. So that's where they get their name, and obviously Jane's Revenge is saying, well, we're coming back to get you now because you've repealed Roe v. Wade.
I did think, I sort of bought into perhaps a common myth that it was named after Jane Roe herself, so it's interesting that you've dug up the roots of that. I appreciate you telling me.
But first, it's worth pointing out that on the topic of abortion, we can't talk about it without bringing up this point that Carl has made in this article on our site, how the left broke the moral compact on abortion, which was, of course, safe, legal and rare. This was Bill Clinton's compromise in the 1990s, and they seem to have forgotten about that rare part, that it's not a form of contraception, it should be used rarely.
Well, if there was no moral prohibition on abortion, because one, it's never safe for the baby, and if you make an individual life negotiable based on the convenience of the mother, why should it be rare if it's amoral? And this is the problem. The Democrats, they've set their own ground, whereas the Republicans and the sort of Christians and libertarians just turned around and said, no, it's a life, we can't do it.
So I think most appallingly is this next thing here. This is a full list compiled from the Family Research Council of all the 100 attacks against pro-life groups nationwide since the beginning of May. And this is egregious. If you could just scroll down, this is a list of all the churches. So this is all across the country. So you got New York, Texas.
That's this year.
Scroll a little bit more slowly. This is since May.
God,
so yeah. We've got pro-life organisations here. We've got Texas,
Wisconsin,
DC,
Oregon,
lots of Texas, Virginia, Alabama, Florida, Oregon, and it carries on and on and on. And yeah, this just goes to show these are all things these aren't even small attacks. These are like firebombs, smashed windows, graffitied. Which one was that? Sorry, John, if you can go back up again.
I'm seeing California.
So this is other incidents as well, like pro-life student organisation memorial vandalised, things like that. This also carries on of lots of vandalising, property destruction,
violent
attacks.
protests,
yes.
etc. But this is
so
hilarious.
This is a 9-page PDF document of all of the attacks since May.
Well, it's mad that most of those last bits, like machete attack in Sacramento, lots of these are in deep blue states which are unaffected by the Roe v. Wade ruling, unfortunately. But it's still this mentality of workers of the world unite, of where you cannot have a neighbouring state with different values to you. We must imperialise someone with our progressive line of fire. And the hilarious thing is, and darkly hilarious, I suppose, is that Ann Coulter published a piece in Breitbart where she looked at the numbers, and it's that it's only about less than a third of all abortions are going to be prevented by the Roe v. Wade ruling, because 2/3 of them obviously still astronomically happen in Democrat states. So,
I mean, who would have thought that people who support abortions have them? I mean, it's not exactly a surprise. But yes, this is just horrifying to me. Like 100 attacks on people, property, institutions, charities in the United States, and just the extent to the political violence in the United States, it makes me feel really sorry for you guys, because you can be perfectly reasonable people, and when the society around you is doing stuff like this, well, I can't help but think that it's only going to push people further and further away from the common ground.
Well, it's not even common ground, it's the non-violent means of resolving conflicts. And this is the civil strife stage on the run-up to a civil war. And just like the slavery issue, you have two irreconcilable moral positions here. And I do think this is going to come to a head. And I wish it wouldn't, but it will. Yeah,
and I think drawing attention to the extent of this is very important, because very, very few institutions have actually done this. Particularly in the mainstream media, they haven't said, well, this is an epidemic, which it certainly is. It's been a few months and there have been 100 attacks. That's massive. One is too many. And I can't help but kind of despair about the state of the United States. So Jane's Revenge have actually directly taken credit for some of these, which you can see on their Wikipedia. If you scroll down to the actions, there's a big table here where these are the ones they've directly taken responsibility for, whereas it's a loose group similar to sort of Antifa in structure,
Right,
and
so
therefore it's difficult to establish what they have taken credit for, but these are the ones they have.
They have cells, but no overarching central command center.
Yes, exactly. And it's also useful to understand how this group works as well, which Alexander Marlowe at Breitbart has successfully identified their social media strategy, which is actually very important if we want to fight against these sorts of people, which are domestic terrorists, although not recognised by your government in the United States, unfortunately, yet. So Alexander writes, a radical left-wing blog called Abolition Media has emerged as a clearinghouse for left-wing threats of violence. It has become the go-to for activists associating themselves with Jane's Revenge. The group has posted dozens of communiques, which is a combination of commune, I assume, and critique. Since the leaks of Justice Alito's draft of the Dobbs opinion, at least 9 of those communiques either mention or are attributed to Jane's Revenge. So this organisation has a direct link. And they point out how they're able to get around the Twitter rules to post this online and get some traction. Abolition Media deftly uses Twitter to promote violence. The pattern of their social media post is simple. They post an image of violence and destruction without openly endorsing them, then include links to articles with the same images that openly support the militancy and/or call for more. Thus far, this strategy has circumvented Twitter rules against posting calls to violence.
So can we just scroll up just slightly, John? Because I noticed something in one of those. Just again, a little bit more, and because there's just a tiny bit more. There's a little bit more. We'll get there eventually. A little bit more. Keep going. There we go. Right. It says the Facebook group International Workers of the World, and I just wanted to bolster the point that we were saying about the impossibility for neighbouring states to not have agitated activism even within the states that do still have abortion despite the Roe ruling. It's the idea that there is no compromising with these domestic terrorists because they do want to imperialise their faux universal amorality onto you. And
well, they're taking the name of their organisation from the first line of the Communist Manifesto, aren't they? So they're not exactly to be reasoned with.
Well, the last line. But,
oh,
yeah. But this is...
It's been a while since I've read it.
Don't worry, mate. You're just better off as a coaster at this point than any piece of literature. But in speaking the first line, there is this sort of spectre that hangs over the other states, and that is this threat of violent domestic terrorism, because they are happy to kill people to keep killing babies, and it's just utterly evil.
So I thought it'd be interesting to look at this Abolition Media website and what they have actually got here. And this is an example of one of the pictures here. And you'll notice it's titled Jane's Revenge, Attack on 2 Fake Clinics in, that should be Worcester, but I think you pronounce it Worcester in the United States,
Wrong.
Massachusetts. It is wrong, yes. But here they have the article, they're showing the graffiti, and look at the kind of language that they're using in these publications that they're trying to garner support. So they say 2 fake clinics in Worcester, Massachusetts, problem pregnancy and Clearway Clinic have been attacked. The a-holes who lie to vulnerable pregnant people about abortion to confuse them and convince them to not seek abortions discovered this morning that a building has been redecorated with paint and broken glass. As others have said, it is fun and easy to attack. As more people discover the joy in attacking the infrastructure of patriarchy, the attacks will surely continue with increasing frequency. To anyone reading this thinking that it sounds like a good time, consider this your invitation to join the party. To any purveyors of patriarchy that might be reading this, F off, or you could be next.
The darkly comedic thing is to accuse not wanting infant girls in the womb to be killed of being a part of the patriarchal hegemon. There are certain NHS trusts in London boroughs, due to immigration, who will not disclose the sex of the baby during an ultrasound because of the rates of abortion. So you guys are on the same side of religious fundamentalists in some backworld country that have come over here who want to abort their children just because they're girls. Does that sit comfortably with you? Oh, probably, because you're not actually on the side of women living good lives. You're on the side of politically ascribing their identity and claiming them for socialist resolution. Go to hell.
So, moving on to some of the other attacks that this so-called media group have posted. Here they're calling them another fake pregnancy centre smashed in Lynchburg. I think that's Virginia, isn't it? And then there's another one here in Longmont, Colorado, I think that is. So they've graffitied, "If abortions aren't safe, neither are you," and then the anarchy symbol with a smashed-in door and what looks like a burnt interior as well.
The idea that you can call them fake pregnancy centres. No, they're there to support pregnancy. If anything, Planned Parenthood is the fake pregnancy centre because it's for parenthoods which aren't planned.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't go to a Planned Parenthood because you plan to have a baby. You go to it because you had an accidental condom break, or you couldn't be bothered to use birth control, and then you want to kill your child. So you got the wrong targets here.
It is quite a subversive name, isn't it? Planned Parenthood, because they're dealing with things that are...
Well, it was planned according
unplanned.
to Margaret Sanger, who was a massive eugenicist who didn't want black people to be parents, but it seems like she's getting a goal in New York, unfortunately.
So, moving on to another article here, and this is more recent, and this was in response to their so-called Night of Revenge. So they say, "The night of June 24th was the night of rage. We decided to attack a crisis pregnancy centre in Glendale, California with spray paint." By the way, California's not going to ban abortion, is it? It's going to still have the very liberal rules. I mean, weren't they trying to legalise it up until the point of birth?
Yeah, I don't know what California's specific rules are. I know New York has that. I know Virginia has that. Though actually after the new governor's come in, that might have changed. So I'm not too familiar on what the restrictions are. Yeah, lots of Colorado has it. There's a lot of states which are. Harry actually looked at one state legislation. I can't remember where it was, but it would accidentally allow it for months after birth as well. So it would decriminalise infanticide.
That is simply evil, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yes, it carries on. The phrases written were, "Jane was here, abort the court," and I quote here, "If abortions aren't safe, neither are you." All across the country, people are protesting and revolting against the attack on bodily autonomy. As we predicted almost a month ago, the United States Supreme Court stripped millions of people of bodily autonomy and access to abortion. This is only the beginning of the attacks on autonomy in store from the courts and fascists. Up next on the chopping block is access to contraception, the legality of everyday queer life. Don't know what that even means. And gay marriage.
Don't threaten me with a good time.
But this is part of the broader pattern of fascism within the United States.
Yes, devolution to state legislature is fascism.
It's kind of the opposite, yeah. I mean, you can make a case that the United States in its current form is acting a little bit fascistically, but not in the way that they think.
No, definitely not. I'd point more towards the insider trading.
Yes.
Yeah.
Looking at you, Pelosi. And it carries on to all the conservatives, Fox News anchors, judges, cops, Christian extremists, or federal agents. Hello.
You're fed.
Yeah, that's me, all
okay.
along.
Shut the lights off, you'll glow.
This attack is nothing in comparison to what is in store for you. Some spray paint will be the least of your worries. For decades, you have bombed abortion clinics and murdered doctors. We fight not just for abortion rights, but for trans liberation, ecological harmony, decolonization, the destruction of white supremacy, and capitalism. I mean, well done. Full marks for getting all the buzzwords in.
The last bit is, again, after all those buzzwords, but the uprooting of the entire global civilization.
Yes.
If you think of all the resistance as literally the WEF's line, you couldn't get more mainstream if you tried, you larpers.
It's just pathetic, isn't it? And it carries on, "We will hunt you down and make your lives a living hell. You started this war, but we will win it. So far, it's just been pregnancy crisis centres, but tomorrow it might be your cars, your homes, or even your lives. We support a diversity of tactics and we will not step down in this fight."
I've heard this line before. So I don't want to presage what's happening, but of course they aren't listed as a domestic terror group yet. But what's stopping, other than agreement within the deep state, what's stopping them from having their IP address found and just arresting these people for open calls for violence?
I'm not sure. It's not entirely clear.
Okay, wonderful.
Because we will get onto it in a second, but there are plenty of people pushing for them to be declared a terrorist organisation.
Add my name to that list.
And here is just a picture of a pregnancy centre that has been firebombed, one of many, and that's what's left. So just so you know the extent of what a firebombing looks like. I know most people know that it's not good.
I'm
But
just
to see
distracted by the fact that we have that chair in the office.
it's not our office, I promise.
No.
But yes, if that's not enough insanity for you, how about leftists and progressives arguing that they're probably a false flag group?
Okay, all right, this is interesting. You now have my attention.
So this is an article from The Intercept by Judith Levin, a progressive, believe it or not.
Right, okay.
And I'm just going to read a short extract from the juiciest part, because I'm not going to bore you with the rest of her ramblings.
AOC level juicy.
Yes. No talk of arses today.
No.
It follows. When I read that a group calling itself Jane's Revenge had firebombed anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers in Madison, Wisconsin, Des Moines, Iowa, and other locations from Washington State to Washington, D.C., my first thought was, what the F? I mean, really? Did you bury your head in the sand in 2020?
Yeah.
Was this a false flag? Who but the extreme right, which had looked the other way whilst its terrorist armies murdered abortion providers, would besmirch the name of Jane?
Oh, it's not real infanticide, thank you! God almighty.
The Chicago collective that provided over 11,000 safe, illegal abortions before Roe v. Wade. This seems the perfect tactic. A campaign of violence by pro-choice forces would reinforce the picture of abortion advocates as barbarians and justify their draconian punishments of those who perform, facilitate, or have abortions. Come to think of it, had anyone in the world ever thrown a Molotov cocktail in the name of reproductive freedom? This is... She needs to be in a padded room, right?
I am rarely speechless, but it genuinely, in real time, went from it's not happening to it's a false flag to but it's still a good thing. Of saying, had anyone in the world ever thrown a Molotov cocktail in the name of reproductive freedom? You're implying there, no, you don't believe they have, but it would definitely have been justified to achieve it if we had. Because, okay.
So yes, that's the depressing low point, but I've got some good news.
Go on.
So, Facebook labels abortion rights vandals as terrorists following Roe reversal.
Wow, okay, I'm surprised.
And this is again by The Intercept as well.
Right.
I don't know why I've used them as a source, but they were one of the few people that were reporting on it. So, the day after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, Facebook's parent company Meta internally designated the abortion rights group Jane's Revenge as a terrorist organisation, according to company materials reviewed by The Intercept, subjecting discussion of the group and its actions to the company's most stringent censorship policies. And get a load of this next part. This is... Experts say the decision, Meta's first known policy response for the post-Roe era, threatens free expression around abortion rights at a critical moment.
Oh, really? Which experts would those be, huh?
It's funny that they just say experts, isn't it? Which experts?
Yeah. Maybe
which
the people
academics,
sitting on
which institutions?
Those sitting on the board of Planned Parenthood by any chance?
When they use the term expert and don't clarify who the expert is,
Yeah.
they're almost certainly talking out of their behinds.
Yeah, they just shouted down the hall, Gary, what do you think of this ruling? I don't know, mate.
I mean, the term expert is obviously subjective, but they're using it pretty liberally here. And it also takes them a lot of nerve to whine about free expression, doesn't it?
Yeah. We asked our nearest coat hanger manufacturer what he thought about his stocks in the aftermath.
Yes. It's not just Facebook that are taking a stand. I mean, I'm quite surprised that they took a stand at all, especially so quickly. I mean, well done, Mark. You may be an AI, but at least you're doing some good stuff. So this is Tom Cotton's own website here. Cotton demands action from DOJ following violent attacks on crisis pregnancy centres by pro-abortion group Jane's Revenge.
Good man.
And I'm just going to read a short paragraph from this. What is the Department of Justice doing to protect Americans from the violent attacks? At a minimum, you should be bringing federal charges against the perpetrators where appropriate and investigating Jane's Revenge as a domestic terrorist organisation. If you're unwilling to protect Americans from these attacks, you should resign. Although, in my opinion, you should resign in any case.
Good man.
Very true. Glad to hear it. Sensible voices in the Senate. That's good.
Imagine trying to justify throwing Molotov cocktails through the windows of crisis pregnancy centres, which, yes, they discourage abortion because they believe babies are humans and deserve life, but also they just provide clothing to disadvantaged mothers. So, completely self-defeating of the goals you apparently purport to.
Oh, it's so stupid,
uphold.
isn't it?
But
It's unbearable.
We shouldn't expect consistency from leftists.
So, the Washington Examiner has also reported on the fact that Representative Mark Wayne Mullen for Oklahoma, along with 28 other House Republicans, sent a letter calling for the Department of Homeland Security, and the FBI to classify those committing crimes through Jane's Revenge, to classify them as domestic terrorists, which, I mean, they're committing acts of domestic terrorism. You'd have thought that would be a bit more of a broader church than 28 House Republicans, wouldn't you? You think this would be a bipartisan issue, ideally.
Yeah, but then we saw obviously a bunch of Republicans the other day come out and codify the rights to contraception and gay marriage, voting on those. So I'm sure they were just too busy being beset by really performative other bills rather than protecting infants and crisis pregnancy centre workers.
Hopefully the return of Trump's going to get the Republican Party in order.
God willing.
So, moving on to the Wall Street Journal. This was very interesting, actually. So this is from the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal.
Right.
And I couldn't believe my eyes when I read this. So it's titled A Night of Rage on Abortion. And I'm going to read some of the key points here that it's almost like I wrote this.
Okay.
I know, it's weird. And you need to pinch yourself. The threat is explicit on abortion, as the arrest of an unarmed man outside Justice Brett Kavanaugh's home attests. Demonstrators continue to protest outside the homes of some justices, and now comes a vow from the shadowy group that calls itself Jane's Revenge to commit what sounds like what Democrats would call insurrection if it were aimed at another part of the government.
True.
What has happened to the Wall Street Journal? An incitement to more than peaceful protest against the court. The threat of violence has to be taken seriously because Jane's Revenge has already taken credit for acts of destruction against pregnancy crisis centres around the country. Media reports say the Federal Bureau of Investigations is investigating the attacks, and we hope so. Attorney General Merrick Garland made a show of establishing a domestic terror unit at the Justice Department, and equal justice means it can't be aimed merely at right-wing groups. I mean, what has happened?
An open refutation of repressive tolerance. I wonder if they sacked the guy who wrote the PewDiePie op-ed originally.
And the last part I'm going to read is that Jane's Revenge threats have received little attention in the rest of the press, but we hope the Washington, D.C. and the Capitol Police are much better prepared than they were for the riots of 2020 and 2021. The justices and the court, as a democratic institution, have to be protected.
Are they referring to the riots of 2021 as January the 6th? Are they really equivalating 2020? You almost had
I think
us, guys.
that the riots of 2020 would be the
BLM ones, and then the 2021 ones are January the 6th, which really unsupervised Capitol tour being equal to $3 million in property damage.
There was violence at the rear entrance that went on for about 2 hours. So I mean,
are we referring to monkeypox again? Sorry, had to.
Oh dear. But yes, I was quite surprised by the fact that places like the Wall Street Journal and Facebook are coming out equivocally against this group when the government clearly isn't. I mean, the FBI is supposedly investigating them, but we've got no details on that. But I wanted to draw attention to them because, of course, the press haven't really been covering it very much because it doesn't help the optics of the pro-abortion side, the radical extreme left. It doesn't make them look reasonable, does it? If they're firebombing things and carrying out 100 attacks since May.
Yeah, it doesn't look good for our campaign to kill babies if we kill people.
Yes. But yeah, hopefully armed with this new information, you now know that these people, they're not good.
I could have told you that before you started the segment, mate.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Contemplation series that Josh does, and as you can see here, his opinions on who we should purge from the right. You want to follow what else he's putting out, you can follow him on Getter at @Josh_firm on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.